היום אנחנו מארחים אורח מיוחד, עורך דין מרק הס, מומחה בייעוץ וליווי בתחום המיסים האמריקאים, ויש לו המון קשרים בארצות הברית. בקיצור, שווה לכם להכיר אותו. שלום צופות וצופים יקרים, ברוכים הבאים לתוכנית נוספת של אולפן העסקים והאקטואליה עם אור-לי, אסיה-איך מאולפני ברדוגו גרופ לייב באיירפורט סיטי. אז מה מחכה לנו היום בתוכנית? צפויה לנו תוכנית מרתקת עם הרבה תובנות שעשויות לסייע לכם בקבלת החלטות עסקיות חכמות יותר. אז אם אתם שוקלים להשקיע בנדל"ן בארצות הברית או להרחיב את הפעילות העסקית שלכם שם, את התוכנית הזו אסור לכם לפספס. עורך דין מרק הס איתנו כדי לשפוך אור על הסוגיות החשובות בתחום המיסוי שעסקים ומשקיעים ישראלים נתקלים בהם כאשר הם פועלים בשוק האמריקאי. שלום עורך דין מרק הס וברוך הבא לתוכניתנו.
שלום, שלום.
אז צופים יקרים, בקיצור יהיה סופר חשוב, יש בהחלט למה לצפות, כל זאת מיד אחר האות. שוב שלום, צופות וצופים יקרים. שמי אור-לי אסיה, מנכ"לית סטארט-אפ, ייעוץ ואסטרטגיה לפיתוח עסקי יצירתי, חדשנות ושיווק, כבר למעלה מ-18 שנה מובילה עסקים להצלחה וצמיחה עסקית, וכבר הובלתי מאות. וגאה להיות חברה ודוברת של לשכת היועצים העסקיים והניהוליים בישראל. בתוכנית שלנו נתמקד בעסקים הפועלים בשוק הישראלי, חברות, ארגונים, עסקים קטנים ובינוניים, וכמובן היזמים שהם הלב הפועם של הכלכלה שלנו. נחשוף את הסיפורים המרתקים של יזמים אמיצים עם חזון, בעלי ניסיון, ונלמד מההצלחות וגם מהמכשולים שבדרך. כמומחית בתחום הייעוץ העסקי אני מאמינה שבכל שלב ובכל מצב כל עסק יכול להתפתח ולהשיג צמיחה רבה. דווקא בתגובות מאתגרות כמו אלו יש חשיבות קריטית בהענקת תמיכה לעסקים במדינת ישראל כדי שיוכלו לשוב ולשגשג ולהגביר את רווחיהם. אין ספק עם ישראל חי וביחד תמיד ננצח. וכעת לנושא של התוכנית שלנו הפעם. נמצא איתנו עורך דין מרק הס, המתמחה בייעוץ וליווי בתחום המיסים האמריקאים. הרעיון יהיה באנגלית. שווה להקשיב לכל מילה, ובייחוד למי שמתעתד להשקיע בנדל"ן או השקעות נוספות בארצות הברית, ובעוד עניינים שחשוב לדעת לגבי הכסף שלכם. ובמאמר מוסגר, מרק הס הוא בין היתר גם עורך דינם של שחקנים מפורסמים בארצות הברית. ועתה אעבור לרעיון באנגלית. And now to our special guest, Mark Hess, attorney, who is specializes in U.S. tax consultant. Mark, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Orly. So nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. Mark, before we reach to the questions, could you briefly tell us about your career, how it's all started, and about your specialty?
Sure. So I started out in college majoring in accounting, and then I worked at Coopers and Lybrand, which is now part of PricewaterhouseCoopers, for a number of years, and I did tax work there. And then I decided to go to law school. I went to Columbia Law School. And when I graduated law school, I took a job in Los Angeles. I always thought that I was going to be a corporate lawyer. But when I got to the firm that I joined, which was Loeb & Loeb, the name of the firm, they had just lost a number of their top tax lawyers. And they said, Mark, would you mind doing tax work? We know you know it from your years at Coopers and Lybrand, just until we can hire somebody. And of course, they never hired anybody. And 25% of my time, which was they asked me to do at the beginning, became 50% and became 100%. And so you could say that I backdoored into becoming a tax lawyer, but I always enjoyed tax, and it's very kind of a lot like studying the Talmud, lots of very fine points and analysis, etc. And so that's how I became a tax lawyer.
Yeah, and every time, every day, new changes, new laws, so it's quite interesting. And when we're talking about Israelis who would like to invest in real estate investment in the U.S., what should they be aware of, and how? Just a second, I want to ask you more. What are the tax differences between the U.S. and the Israeli tax laws?
Okay, so let me answer the first question first, which is kind of what should Israelis be concerned about when they're investing, especially in U.S. real estate. The number one issue I'm finding is that Israelis don't realize that there's a major estate tax in the United States. And if they're investing thinking they're going to leave the assets or they're going to sell and leave the proceeds or whatever to their children, they don't always take into account the fact that since they are not U.S. Residents or citizens, there is no exclusion to the estate tax which applies to Americans. An American can die and leave over $13 million to whoever they want to, free of estate tax. If it's an Israeli or another foreigner, it's only $60,000. So almost every dollar that you have of U.S. investment in real estate, if you're Israeli, is going to be subject to estate tax when you die, and that number can be as high as 40%. So you're giving away almost half of the value of the real estate when you die. And so I've been hired many times to try to help investors in Israel figure out ways around that problem. And there are definitely a number of solutions.
So there is tax for Israelis, special tax for Israelis in the States. But since they're Israelis, they also have tax, the Israeli tax. Mm-hmm. Is there a way that they can avoid paying double tax both to the American and the Israeli countries?
Often yes, not always, but often yes. There is a tax treaty between Israel and the United States that essentially provides for trying to minimize the double tax between the two countries. And so, for example, if you sell an asset and you're Israeli, let's say, and also subject to American tax, you can offset one against the other. And so you get a tax credit from the taxes you pay in Israel against American tax or vice versa. So often, probably most of the time, there's not going to be a double tax. The problem comes in when there's an issue of timing. Sometimes the tax that's due in America is going to be later in time than the tax due in Israel, maybe a year, several years, etc. When that happens, then a lot of times you can't offset one against the other, and that's when you have the double tax. So what you have to do is make sure that you plan in advance in any kind of transaction you're doing that the taxation is going to be due at the same time. In real estate, an example can come up where, let's say, you make an installment sale. Okay, let's say in the United States, you sell an asset and it's paid 10% a year until you get paid. In the United States, you can defer the tax over time, corresponding to the payments that are due. In Israel, you can't. In Israel, it's due immediately when the sale is. So if you're not careful, you will not be able to get a complete offset. You can offset probably some years, but you're not going to get a complete offset of one against the other. And so that's a trap that you have to be very careful of.
And you can use a special consultant such as yourself. If we're talking about businesses, Israeli businesses often wants to establish properties in the U.S. How can they prepare the tax payment between the two countries, and what common mistakes should they avoid?
Mm-hmm. Really, I'd say the main issues are how do you structure. Let's say it's an Israeli. What I see most often is an Israeli company setting up a subsidiary or an affiliate company in the United States. A lot of times, it'll start in Israel. You'll have the R&D, you have the idea, and then all of a sudden it gets to the point where they feel they can market it. Then they want to set up a company in the United States and many other places in order to market and to earn money from what they've developed in Israel. And so One of the issues is, what kind of company should it be? Should it be a subsidiary? Should it be an affiliate? By an affiliate, it would mean a company that's like a sister company, but not owned by the other company. Maybe it has different owners, maybe it has the same owners. You also want to look at which state that you work in. In the United States, unlike in Israel, there are 50 states, and each state has its own tax laws. Some states, for example, in Texas and in Florida, there's no income tax. In other states, like California and New York, there's a substantial income tax. California is over 13%. New York, if it's New York State or New York City, could be 15 or 16%. And so where you work can be a major issue that you have to deal with. So I'd say those are probably the top two issues you want to look at. You want to look at how you structure, and by the way, how you're structuring also involves, can you set up what's called an S corporation in the United States or some other flow-through entity so that you don't have a double tax. If you're in a normal corporation, if a corporation earns fees and then pays dividends, let's say, to the owners, there's going to be a corporate tax and an individual tax. However, there are flow-through entities like what's called an LLC or a subchapter S corporation where there's only one level of tax. It's only the individual. So that's another issue that you really want to think about. Foreigners normally cannot own an S corporation stock, but they can still be members of an LLC. And so those are all kind of issues you want to look into when you're thinking about setting up an affiliate or a subsidiary in the United States.
If one has double citizenships, how will the tax laws will affect him?
Well, the way you asked it, there's also another little point that I think has to be explored, which is, to start with, every major country in the world, except the United States, taxes its residents on their worldwide income. So if you pass the test to be a resident of Israel, you're going to be taxed on your income from everywhere, no matter where it was earned. If you are not a resident of Israel, then you're only taxed on what you earn in Israel. In the United States, that's not the case. In the United States, if you're a citizen of the United States, you're going to be taxed on your worldwide income. Doesn't matter if you reside in Israel or not. And so the typical situation, you have someone who is born and raised in the United States, makes Aliyah, and now is living in Israel. They're going to be double taxed on everything in both places because they're on the one hand a resident of Israel and on the other hand a citizen of the United States. And that's really what makes that whole issue much more difficult to deal with, because it's virtually impossible to escape the U.S. tax. And in fact, I have a number of clients who made Aliyah and now have approached me and said they want me to help them leave the United States, and that way they won't have to be subject to U.S. taxation anymore on this whole issue. And so you're seeing a lot lately of people who want to what's called expatriate from the United States because they feel that it's too expensive from a tax perspective to be subject to U.S. tax all over. Having said that, the treaty still applies, and so if you're under the treaty, if you're considered a resident of both countries, and under the treaty it says that if you're a citizen of the United States, you're automatically considered a resident for that purpose too. So if you're a resident of both countries, then the treaty tells you, okay, this country gets the tax money first, and then this gets it second. So in the typical case where, let's say, you have someone who's made Aliyah, they will pay tax in Israel and then get a credit against the taxes owed in the United States. And so, again, as long as you don't have the timing issues which we talked about earlier, you should still be in a situation in which there's no, you end up paying the highest rate of tax of the two countries in whatever category of tax it is. So if, let's say, in a particular year capital gains are higher in Israel, you're going to pay that rate. If ordinary income is higher in the United States, you're going to pay that rate. That's kind of usually what it amounts to. So it's a little more than what you'd pay if you're just living in one country, but it's not completely double as a rule. Again, unless we have, like we said earlier, those timing issues.
Ooh. So maybe I won't get U.S. citizenship, but
you know, in the case we talked earlier about the real estate, remember I mentioned there are a number of solutions. One solution is having the person get U.S. citizenship so that when they die, the estate tax is going to be much, much less. So for some people, it actually is a good idea to become citizens. And the United States offers incentives to people who have a lot of assets. So if you go to the United States government and say, let's say, I have $10 million of real estate assets, they're going to fast track you to become a citizen. And then that could help you at least get out of that issue we talked about earlier with the Israeli subject to the big estate tax when they die.
Wow, important points. I think all our viewers should listen, learn, write, or turn to you. And because you have a lot of contacts in the United States, I understand that you guide your clients how to choose or you offer them professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, legal professionals. Do you refer them to appropriate? Do you know how to refer them to appropriate professionals?
Oh, sure. You know, one of the most popular sports in the United States is football. And the person who's the most important person on the football team is the quarterback. Because the quarterback, he's like guiding everything, and you know, he's throwing the ball to this guy, or he's handing the ball to this, or whatever. And so my clients often look at me as the quarterback for getting their team together. So they'll come to me and they say, Mark, I want to buy a company in the United States. I don't know anybody. I don't, find me an accountant, find me a lawyer, find me an appraiser, find me an investment banker, etc. And I have, thankfully a very long, good list of people who I know and trust. So that's one of the ways that I help my Israeli clients. And similarly, when an American client wants to do business in Israel, I also, have a list, maybe not as long, but I have a good list of people to refer as well. And so, I try to make sure my clients are well taken care of, and to, kind of supervise the process and make sure that they don't feel like they're left alone, and try to oversee everything. But that's kind of like the job of a quarterback in a football game. I
love the terminology, quarterback. And remember the name Marcus. This name could be useful to you, maybe not now, but maybe in the future. Could you share with us a case of from your experience where improper handling of foreign assets or businesses led a higher tax payment to an Israeli that you dealt with this case?
Sure. One of them is exactly the type of case we talked about, where I had an Israeli family come to me and say that the father, the head of the family, had just died, and they're getting all these letters from the IRS about estate tax, etc. And this was a case where the individual invested almost $50 million in different U.S. real estate, and unfortunately it was too late. Once the person dies, there's really no more planning you can do, and so it was a case where they lost almost $20 million of value which could have been, had they just been planned better, they could have saved that money. So yeah, that's a very common thing, and it's important to plan in advance and not to wait until it's too late. And so a lot of people think, even people I meet with, and I tell them, and we discuss this, and I tell them, we have to do something. I'm young, etc., and we'll deal with it next year, whatever. And a few times also, they got into a car accident or whatever, and they weren't able to fix the problem. So, that's I'd say one example of where simple, it's not so simple to fix the problem. It takes a lot of work and etc., but you can fix it, or at least you can make it much better. But if you don't do anything about it, you're, as they say in the vernacular, you're afzoris.
Can you give us final tips, because our interview is about to end with a few minutes. Mm-hmm. What tips would you give our viewers?
So, I think the most important thing is as follows, and I see this a lot. There are at least 20, 30, 40 years ago, when American parents made Aliyah, one of the first things they did is make sure their kids became citizens of the United States. And that means they become subject to paying to income tax. And then 30, 40, 50 years, the children may never have even set foot in the United States, but they're earning money, they're making a good living here, and all of a sudden they get a letter from the IRS saying, where's your tax returns for the last 20, 30 years? And so I think it's important. A lot of people say, well, you know what, I'll worry about it. I'm not going to file in the United States. I'll worry about it if they ever come to me. And you could be lucky, you could be lucky and win what we call the audit lottery, and you never have to deal with it. But a lot of people get caught. And if you get caught, it can be a very, very expensive process to get out of, and penalties and interest and all this. And especially happens with, let's say an entrepreneur. The parents made Aliyah 30 years ago. An entrepreneur all of a sudden becomes extremely successful. And when that person becomes extremely successful, if he doesn't file taxes in the U.S. and pay taxes, could be a huge problem. So I would say don't be what you'd call cavalier about the issue. If you're an American citizen, make sure you pay your taxes. It may be that all you have to do is file a return. You may not owe anything. File the return. Don't get into a situation where you could have lots of penalties, because the IRS can institute penalties even where there's no taxes due, just because you didn't file the return. So I would say on an issue like that, get an accountant who can handle your U.S. returns, file your returns, and don't leave it hanging where it could be a big problem.
It's important to pay tax on time, even in Israel. Mm-hmm. And how can you be reached on the online? And can you give us your phone number so we can reach you, or our viewers can call you?
Of course. So my email address is mark at hesstaxlaw.com. That's HESSTAXLAW.com. My website is similar to that. It's www.hesstaxlaw.com. My phone number in Israel is 0547-684-176, and my U.S. phone number is 310-926-7499.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Sure. My pleasure.
We learned a lot, and I think they are we got very good tips and advices, and it's important to know before you do some things, and then you better be safe than sorry.
Right.
Thank you. עורך דין מרקס, תודה רבה על שהיית איתנו כאן היום, ושיתפת אותנו במומחיותך בתחום המיסים האמריקאים. נתת לנו הרבה חומר למחשבה, ואני בטוחה שהצופים שלנו ירוויחו מאוד מהתובנות שלך. לנוחותכם, מספר הטלפון של עורך דין מרקס יופיע על המסך. וכעת לטיפ חשוב שלי לעסקים, והפעם בעלי עסקים. יש לי טיפ שיווקי מנצח עבורכם. לפני שאתם משקיעים תקציבי ענק בפרסום, חשוב שתוודאו התאמה מדויקת בין המוצר לקהל היעד, שתבדקו את התמחור מול המתחרים, בחרו את ערוצי השיווק שיובילו לתוצאות האפקטיביות ביותר. שיווק חכם מתחיל בהבנה עמוקה של הלקוח, לא בהוצאות גדולות. סוף מעשה והצלחה שיווקית בייעוץ עסקי תחילה. אז מה עושים? מזמינה אתכם אליי לשיחה קצרה ללא התחייבות ותשקיעו בעסק בחוכמה. חייגו או שילחו וואטסאפ למספר 079-68000072, יחד נהפוך את העסק שלכם לכוכב. ומה איתכם, מנהלי חברות, בעלי עסקים ומומחים? לא הייתם רוצים סוף סוף רעיון מקצועי אצל האחת שיודעת? ברור שכן. אז למה אתם מחכים? מזמינה אתכם להציג את המומחיות והפתרונות הייחודיים שלכם אצלנו ללקוחות הפוטנציאליים. כי הגיע הזמן שכולם יראו את זה על המסך שלנו. רוצים לעשות זאת מקצועי ונכון ולהשביח את ההצלחה העסקית שלכם? חייגו או שילחו וואטסאפ למספר 079-68000072, 3 אפסים, ויחד נהפוך את העסק שלכם לכוכב ברעיון. זהו זה, צופות וצופים יקרים, הסתיימה לה עוד תוכנית של אולפן העסקים והאקטואליה עם אור-לי אסיה-איך מאולפני ברדוגות גרופ לייב באיירפורט סיטי. מקווה שהתוכנית נתנה לכם השראה ואולי תיישמו את הטיפים שקיבלתם בתוכנית כבר מחר בבוקר ותרגישו הרבה יותר טוב עם עצמכם. בואו נחזק את העסקים במדינה, כי אין לנו ארץ אחרת. להתראות בתוכנית הבאה.